Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Schneerson of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Welcome back to our special series on prayer, which originally was meant to be in honor of Elul, the month of Elul, and I was hoping that I would finish this tractate that we're learning by Rosh Hashanah, but I realize now that that was a little bit too optimistic as we are now post Rosh Hashanah. So I hope that you all had a very meaningful Rosh Hashanah. I know for me personally, on a personal note, even though we haven't finished this tractate just yet, from the little bit that we have gotten through in this tractate that we've been learning, this tractate on prayer, Kuntres Hatefilla of the Rebbe Rashab, I actually did notice a difference in the quality of my davening and in the focus that I had, just in terms of, having a little bit of an understanding of the power of prayer and what it is that we're supposed to be focusing on when we pray. And, and we still have quite a number of holidays ahead of us. Yom Kippur is at the end of this week. So hopefully we'll get through a little bit more of this tractate by then and maybe get a little bit deeper into what prayer really means and how we can improve the quality of our prayer by then. So here we go. So today we're going to be focusing on chapter 9. And in chapter 9, it's kind of a continuation of chapter 8. So if you've been following along, and I don't know that I'm able to give like a full summary each time of every single chapter, because that would just take really long, but kind of like the main point that we've gotten to where we've approached in our journey thus far is coming to an understanding of the purpose of prayer and the value of prayer is to really use prayer as a way to transform ourselves, to refine ourselves, and with the ultimate goal of actually coming to this place of unification with God, where there is no separation between us and God. And really the only thing that separates us between us and God is our animal souls, is our kind of like coarse nature. And this is what we need to work through in order to kind of reveal our inner godly selves, the part of ourselves that really is one with God and it is not separate from God at all. And what we've been discussing, and we really started getting into this in the previous chapter, is how prayer can really be used as a tool and should be used as a tool for self-transformation. And the way that this happens is through something which is known as hitbonenut. Hitbonenut is often translated to mean meditation, but as we've discussed, it's very different than more Eastern styles of meditation, which involve just like breathing techniques or, sitting in a cross-legged position and removing thoughts from our mind. In fact, there's a lot of brain activity happening during this type of meditation and a lot of very proactive brain activity, a lot of thinking and contemplating and analysis and really delving deeply into things that we've learned, specifically godly ideas that we've learned, what we call Chassidus. This study of Chassidus is of the godliness, the godly nature of reality, of underpinning all of reality. And we've spoken about how, some people make the mistake that the meditation that we discuss in connection with prayer is really what happens before prayer. That, a lot of people have the custom of learning Tanya or learning some other Chassidus before they pray. And that's kind of like the meditative time, that they're meditating, and then they pray. And then it's like, hopefully their meditation seeps into their prayer. But what we've been learning is, in fact, no, it's a good idea to learn Chassidus before you pray, but the real meditation really happens during prayer. During prayer is when we really should be taking these godly ideas and tapping into the godliness of the ideas and connecting to them while we pray. And again, as we've discussed, this doesn't mean, looking at the words of prayer and trying to come up with our own interpretations and innovations about what they mean and, trying to become overly spiritual and arousing different emotions. No, it means more really, learning Chassidus properly and coming about it in a more kind of like receptive place, from a place of a student who's really trying to understand what these Hasidic ideas are telling us and trying to really tap into the godliness inherent in the idea. So not just trying to understand the concept as a concept, the way that you would understand any other concept, like just an intellectual idea, but really grasping the godliness, the essential godliness within the concept. So now in today's chapter 9, we're going to talk about why prayer is so essential for this. Like, seeing as this whole process that we've been discussing really does seem to be like an intellectually driven process, like it really is about like analysis and contemplation and meditation. It would seem that it would be enough to just learn, to just like spend, like we know that in Judaism and in amongst Chasidim, Chabad Chasidim in particular, there's a very big emphasis on learning and studying and, learning the different teachings of the Rebbeim, the Maimorim, the Sichas and all of that stuff. So why even pray? Like, what's the point of prayer? Can't we accomplish this refinement of the soul that we're looking for, the refinement of our character, through just learning itself, learning about these things and meditating upon these ideas? What's the point of prayer? So that's what we're going to discuss today, that in fact, prayer is absolutely essential and it's not enough to just learn Torah. The prayer is actually where we take the Torah that we learned, specifically the Chassidus that we've learned, and we internalize it and we bring it into our bodies, into our minds, into who we are. Now, there were certain select individuals throughout history. We mentioned Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who are exceptions, who were able to affect this kind of like self-transformation through learning Torah alone and not through prayer. They didn't even actually have to pray. And we say that this kind of refinement is a from above to below kind of refinement, where they're just like, learning Torah, receiving the wisdom from above, and that wisdom seeps into them and refines them. But for the vast majority of us, namely pretty much me, you, anybody who's listening to this podcast, most likely, this refinement happens from a below to above place. That's the only way that it can happen, which involves prayer, and it must involve prayer. And the Rebbe Rashab is really going to caution us and tell us that without prayer, in fact, Torah learning could actually lead a person astray, and it actually could not necessarily affect a person in a positive way. And it may not refine the person at all. So let's get into the text and see how the Rebbe Rashab explains this. Okay, so the Rebbe Rashab begins this chapter referring to the end point of the previous chapter, which is where we discussed the idea that that through praying, that what does prayer do? Prayer brings vitality. It brings chayos, we call it in Hebrew, into the concepts that a person learns. So it's like a person learns Chassidus, learns different godly ideas, and then they pray, and this prayer brings this concept to life, specifically in regard to the refinement of the animal soul. Like the concept becomes alive, and thus instigates this refinement of the animal soul that we're looking for. And the way that this happens is through this faculty of da'as that we've described as, connection. It's often translated as knowledge, like a very personalized knowledge. This it's a very focused meditative state. Basically, this is what causes this refinement of the animal soul. So just as this faculty of da'as brings vitality into the concept that's being learned, so through this we can understand the service of prayer, what's known as tefillah, which is done with great focus. In Hebrew, the term is ha'amakat hada'at, where the godly light is felt in their mind and in their heart, and then he feels the goodness, that is to say the advantage of godliness, and gets excited with love and with wanting to go close to God. So meaning to say that if a person really thinks about these ideas that they studied, these Hasidic ideas that they studied while they're praying, and not only just thinks about them in just like a cursory fashion, but really focuses on them, meditates upon them in like a really deep and personal way, this is really going to get them to appreciate godliness and to feel this sense of love for godliness and want to be close to God. And the more they feel this greatness of godliness, like the advantage of godliness, then this is going to have a corresponding effect where they're going to feel the lowliness of bad. It's like sort of like when you recognize the value of something really great. Like let's say if you're like a wine connoisseur or something like that, and if you really come to appreciate really good and high quality wine, then the more you appreciate this high quality wine, the more you won't appreciate very low quality wine. The more like low quality wine will kind of like disgust you. So too here, it's like we're sort of developing refining our senses to godliness and coming to appreciate a sense of the goodness of godliness, of the value of godliness. And the more we do this will actually implant within our souls the choice where we can come to actually choose good and push away evil, right? So just like, again, using my wine example, this is not from the text, this is my own example, is like, the more a person refines themselves with the value of good wine and wine appreciation, chances are, if given the choice, they're going to pick the good wine. They're not going to pick the bad wine. And in accordance with the authenticity of this feeling, like the more, it can't just be like a theoretical feeling that like in theory, they know that godliness is good and the opposite of godliness is bad. It can't just be a theoretical thing. It needs to be something that's actually felt. And the more authentically this is felt, then the more authentically they will have this choice to be able to choose of good over bad, where they're actually going to not want to have the bad. Again, like a wine connoisseur, the example that came to mind for me is, it can't just be that it's like they read in a book that like these are the good wines, those are the bad wines. So then they like look up in the book, oh yes, this is the wine I want because it's good wine. A true wine connoisseur their palate is going to be so refined that they will, even if nobody tells them what wine it is and they just taste the wine, they're always going to pick the better wine because they've refined their palate. They actually feel the difference. So to here, when we refine our palate, so to speak, about godliness, then we actually will choose, the more we refine it in a true way, the more we will actually choose goodness and godliness. Now, the Rebbe Rashab goes on and he says that what this leads us to understand is that the main refinement and rectification of the midos, of the natural character traits, is in the service of prayer specifically, and not so with Torah study. Even if we're talking about learning like the inner aspects of Torah, meaning like learning Chassidus, which is like learning about godly ideas, which is like what we're doing right now. This learning itself does not actually affect a rectification or a clarification of these natural character traits. And then in parentheses here, the Rebbe Rashab says that, as we explained before, and as I mentioned in the intro, that this rectification from above to below that comes about through Torah study is only for very, very high souls, like we spoke about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But for most souls, then the rectification comes from below to above specifically. So, for the vast majority of people, so, for our sake, we'll say, pretty much for everybody, then if a person just learns without praying, without engaging in the service of prayer, then their character traits are going to stay just as strong as before. They're not actually going to change. And in parentheses here, the Rebbe Rashab says that this is even the case, even if a person really connects themselves in a deep way while they're learning Torah. So we're not talking about somebody who's just like learning in a superficial way. Even somebody who really takes the time to connect and to learn in a really authentic way, which is really how we're supposed to accustom ourselves to learn. Nevertheless, any kind of feeling that they might get from this, even if it's there's nothing wrong with their learning. They're actually learning in a really good way. And they might actually even get excited while they're learning. I know for myself, sometimes if I'm learning Chassidus, I'll hear a concept and I'll get, really excited, really inspired by the concept. to the point that it might even motivate my behaviors, that I will want to choose good. The Rebbe Rashab says this is not going to affect them in an inner way so much, so that it's going to stick. It won't have a lasting effect inside of the soul, and it's actually going to just go away after a certain amount of time. Because while a person's learning, even if it's a proper learning and a good kind of learning, the feeling that they get and the excitement that they're going to get about their learning is not the same as the type of excitement that can be generated during prayer, which prayer is what's known as an et ratzon, an auspicious time above and below, which means that it's an auspicious time to be able to catch the light, the good light. So there's something about prayer that can affect more of a transformation, more of a lasting transformation than learning can. Thus, says the Rebbe Rashab, it could be that even if a person learns a lot of Chassidus, they may still remain, God forbid, very far from godliness themselves, or God forbid, it could be even the opposite. And he says, for example, there are a lot of people who learn Chassidus and they get really excited, while they're learning about the Chassidus, about the goodness of the idea. And as soon as they stop learning, then they go and act exactly the opposite of what they learned. Like, meaning to say it didn't actually seep into them in a real way. It remains theoretical, such that they might get involved in, acting foolish or being frivolous and stuff like that, or even speaking profanely, or the like, and can even get so close to actually doing things that are forbidden, to the point that, God forbid, they might actually fall into actual evil, like doing things that are actually not good. So how is this possible? Here we have people that the Rebbe Rashab is describing who learn Chassidus, and while they're learning Chassidus, they're really in it. They're really, connecting to it, and they understand the godliness of the idea. How does it then not last? So the Rebbe Rashab says that this is because of the coarseness of the evil that's inside of their soul is just as strong as it was when they were born, and it didn't move at all, not even a little bit. And this is especially true for somebody who's materialistic and coarse by nature, as will be explained. So, people have different natures that they're born with, and some people are born more coarse, more materialistic. And so these kind of people, even if they learn a lot of Chassidus, if they don't bring in the prayer, if they don't get engaged in the service of prayer, they're not going to actually change their nature. Now, the Rebbe Rashab goes on to say that, on the contrary, somebody who actually does have a broken heart by nature, like some people are just a little bit more sensitive by nature. So if they learn properly, then it actually will affect them a little bit. But nevertheless, even in those kind of people, even people who are a little bit more sensitive by nature, even for those kind of people, yes, they might get a little bit affected by their learning, but it's just going to be temporary. It's not going to produce a lasting change if there's no prayer, if we don't have the service of prayer. And without this work of prayer, without the Avodat HaTefilla, it's called in Hebrew. Again, translations are always so lacking. Every time I say the word prayer, I'm kind of like, there's a part of me that's like, it's not prayer, it's tefillah, but we use the word prayer because that's the best available translation that we have. So the Rebbe Rashab says that that without this service of prayer, then the Torah that they learn can actually, God forbid, be transformed into what's known as sam hamavet, the drug of death in their midst, God forbid. Which means to say that it could actually make them even more coarse, where it can pierce the person and it can actually draw them down. So there's this idea, there's a teaching that, Torah is a very powerful thing. And if it's used properly, it's called like the drug of life. But if, God forbid, the opposite, it is very powerful and it could actually be used for opposite reasons. I mean, we see, how many times in history, for example, we can see how the Bible, quote unquote, has been used, to justify all kinds of different atrocities. And now, on a lesser scale, but still, very relevant and something really to keep in mind is the Rebbe Rashab says that in the books of Musar, like in kind of Jewish self-help books of the Rishonim. These were the scholars, which were known as the Rishonim. They spoke about how gaiva, pride, and gasut ruach, the coarseness of the spirit, are the fathers, the father of the fathers, like the primary fathers of tuma, of impurity. because it's the utmost feeling of yeshus. It's the utmost feeling of a somethingness, and the coarseness of evil. And it's actually the source of all negative character traits. So meaning to say that like ego, is the easiest way to say it. Ego, pride, haughtiness, all of that stuff is like it's the source of all of the negative character traits. And the Rebbe Rashab says that you can read more about this in the first chapter of Masechet Sota. Now the Rebbe Rashab here quotes Mishlei, chapter 17, verse 16, where it says, Lama ze mechir biyad ksil liknot chokhma velev ayin, which the translation is, what good is money in the hand of a fool to purchase wisdom when he has no mind? Meaning to say that wisdom in and of itself is not valuable, and it could be very dangerous, because it could lead to haughtiness and to pride and the like, is what he's implying here. And so the Rebbe Rashab continues. He says the person who desires life, he should not just be satisfied in learning Chassidus on its own. Learning Chassidus in and of itself, just and keeping it at that, is not enough. But rather, this learning should lead them to have a striving of the soul and a striving of their flesh in prayer, to meditate and really deepen their minds very well, so that they will actually feel the light within their minds and within their heart, to get excited with get aroused with feelings of love and fear, true love and fear. And this will cause salvation within their soul and lead them to keep Torah and mitzvahs and to refine their character traits, their natural character traits. And this godly light will become engraved and grasped within their soul within eternally, and it will be sustained, etc., as well as was explained above. So now that's the end of the chapter, and then we have our summary, as we always do at the end. So the summary here is that we explained how tefillah is connected to das, this trait of das, which we've spoken about in previous episodes, which is an intellectual faculty of the mind, but it actually has an emotional element to it. First of all, it connects the mind with the emotions, and even within the mind itself, it's something that we feel. It's an intellectual faculty that feels, because it's personal. It's where the intellect isn't just removed and theoretical anymore. It actually is personal, and it becomes real, and we become connected to whatever it is we're learning about. And so prayer, tefillah, is connected to this idea of das, and that is how we have the godly light become implanted inside of our souls. And without this service of prayer, without the Avodat HaTefilla, it's called in Hebrew, then a person can learn Chassidus, lots and lots of Chassidus, even in a true and deep way. And God forbid, this can actually lead them to the opposite of where we want to go. So that's the end of the chapter for today. So just in conclusion, so we're really getting into understanding how prayer really works and why it's so essential, and how prayer is really meant to be this meditative time, this time where we take all of the Chassidus that we learned, all of these godly ideas that we learned, and we really think about them, not just in an intellectual way, but in a real way. We try to really internalize them and have them seep inside of ourselves. And seeing as prayer, the time of prayer, is what's called an et ratzon, an auspicious time, this is really an auspicious time for us to do that. And that's why it's prayer specifically, and not just learning, that is going to cause this self-transformation that we're looking for. So that is it for today. And we will continue next time with chapter 10. So I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.